Okay, and it appears that we are live for Space Rocks Uplink number 29. And I'm just about to bring in Mark McCorcoran. Do you love a bit of technology? Let's see if it actually works. Okay, fingers crossed. We're nearly live, and I think I can see him appearing. We're just going to give it a couple more seconds and see if he can actually join us. It's always exciting to find out what happens on Uplink, especially, yeah, there we are. Hello, Mark. How are you doing?
I'm here, apparently. Good. All right. I was wondering what was going on. Spinning pizza wheels and all the rest of those lovely things.
We do love a good spinning pizza wheel on Space Rocks Uplink. Well, a delight to see you. And, fortunately, the audience has been spared of me trying to stall for another few seconds. It's just saying, waiting, but I guess that's the excitement of a live stream. And welcome to everyone who's joining us from all over the world, it looks like, tonight. So Mark, what do we have in store? Because, this is a pretty unique pairing, I think, and it's a momentous occasion as well. So tell us a little bit about what we have coming up.
Well, what I have in the background behind me, of course, no surprise to anybody, is the International Space Station. This is a picture from 2011. You can see a space shuttle dock there, for example. So that hasn't happened for a little while. But tomorrow, I think, Saturday, I think there may well be crew on their way on the Crew Dragon vehicle. So right from the origins of the International Space Station 20 years ago to now, it has been permanently occupied, and that's what we're marking tonight, and was celebrated last week. 20 years of permanent occupancy of the ISS by crews from United States, Russia, Europe, Japan, Canada, the collaboration of the ISS. And the two guests we have this evening are from the European Space Agency, colleagues of mine, very well placed to talk us through what's been going on the ISS, its origins, and what we've learned from the ISS to take us forward to future exploration. So the first guest is Frank de Winne, who is an astronaut, has been to the space station twice. He was there in the early days, 2001, 2002, and then later in that decade. And currently he's the head of our Astronaut Centre in Cologne. And he's one of my colleagues in the Human and Robotic Exploration Directorate. And at the other end of kind of the seniority spectrum, if you like, is Angelique Van Ombergen. So she's a PhD in medical science. She works for us at ESA here at ESTEC, where I work. Frank's in in Cologne, which is where the Astronaut Centre is. Angelique works here on the science of the astronauts on the ISS, so human biology and how astronauts work, live, and recover when they return back to Earth, but how all that happens under microgravity on the space station.
Indeed. Well, it's a pretty interesting pairing, I guess, not just because of the authority with which they can speak about things and their experience, and obviously Frank has done something truly extraordinary, but also because I think that they're perhaps ideally placed to, I guess, clue us in on where we're going from here as well. Because it's not just about celebration, it's also asking all of the important questions. And so without further ado, we're going to bring them into Uplink and get going. And as ever, I remind everyone who is watching from wherever you are to jump in on the live chat. Let us know what you'd like to ask, and we'll try and get it in there. Hello, Frank. How are you doing? Are you receiving?
Oh, Frank is receiving but not transmitting.
Yep. I think you might just have to unmute your microphone there. And
there you go.
There we go.
Okay, good evening, everybody. Yes, I'm hearing you loud and clear.
Very good.
Fantastic. Well, it's an absolute pleasure to have you aboard, and I believe Angelique is just coming in as well. I'm not sure if I can actually receive her feed at the moment, so I'm just going to send her a message, and we will get going. Okay. Oh, she's just joining from another channel. It's exciting. Well, Frank, this can't be too unfamiliar to you, I suppose. People want to go up on the ISS without a bit of a problem solving and winging it. I suppose that's a very important thing indeed, I am sure. So I guess I need to ask, as we bring Angelique in, more than a technical achievement, does the ISS represent something important symbolically? I mean, beyond what it symbolizes as an astonishing feat of engineering, what does it mean as a symbol up there?
I think it's a unique project. I don't think that we have ever had in human history a project like this that is technically so difficult, that is away from this planet, and where we have so many countries around the world that were former adversaries, and also today in the current political domain, maybe not always aligned, but that continue to work together and that continue to deliver science and knowledge for humanity. I think it's quite unique in that sense, and I think there is nothing around the world that can compare to the ISS in this perspective.
Yeah.
So you were there pretty much at the beginning, Frank. I mean, you're obviously involved in ESA before space station started construction. If I'm right, you were involved in the X-38 project, a US project, but you were there as a liaison on the ESA side. And you flew to the station pretty early on, and this is a 2011 picture. You saw it early on. How have you seen it evolve from when you were flying to it, when it was, and then early in the 2000s, and then 7 or 8 years later, and now as the program manager for the ISS on the European side and sending other astronauts there? How's that developed? I mean, it's not just, again, as Alex said, it's just not a technical addition of things. It's been much more than that.
Yeah, it has been much more than that, of course. When I had the opportunity, the occasion to fly for the first time to the ISS, it was in 2002, and the construction had just started. Basically, we had the US lab, the FGB, the node, and the service module, and that was it. So it was a pretty small station at the time. And when we flew, of course, we still had the shuttle flying at that moment. There were all kinds of concepts, how we would operate Columbus, bring racks up, bring racks down. And then we have seen throughout the buildup of the ISS that actually the partnership was extremely resilient to a number of accidents and failures that unfortunately we had. We had, of course, the Columbia accident. So then Columbus got delayed by 4 years, 5 years to bring to the space station. We had a Progress launch failure. We had a Cygnus launch failure. We had a SpaceX launch failure. But through all these failures, even a Soyuz manned flight failure at a certain moment, a launch aboard. Through all these failures, the partnership has been extremely resilient, and we have continued to improve the space station, to improve its capabilities, but most of all, to improve the number of hours that we could devote to science. Because at the end, that's why we go to the space station, of course, is to do science and to test technology for exploration. In the beginning, there was very little that we did in that respect. But now, especially with the Crew 1 that's going to launch hopefully in 2 days from now, we're going to go up to 7 people on board of the stations, which is again going to double the time that we have available to do science and technology demonstration. So I think we're just at the start of the exploitation, the real exploitation of the space station. And then, of course, now another new era will start, where we will have all the commercial companies starting also to provide facilities on board of the space station. Think about the Bartolomeo from ESA that we have installed, that we will commission hopefully next year. Nanoracks is flying a commercial airlock. Axiom is planning to fly a commercial module where we could start doing space manufacturing. So I think we see a constant evolution, development of the space station, all under the same framework that has been built 30 years ago. So it's quite amazing, the people that thought about this framework 30 years ago, that wrote this famous international government agreement under which we do all these activities, that they were so foresight that 30 years later, we are still developing the space station.
Mm. So I know Alex is fully busy trying to bring Angelique in here. So let me just continue with the questions. Of course, it's not without criticism as well, space station. I mean, with the 20th anniversary, people of all sorts of statures, I mean, including Martin Rees in the UK, pitched in and said, the scientific return hasn't been worth the amount of money invested. But I think for me that and I'm obviously interested in your take on this. It's if you just say, I take the same amount of money, even if it was available for pure science, right? I mean, it's not as if the ISS is taken from the same pot as an astrophysics mission necessarily. I think it's a bit naive politically, but it's not just about that. The science, you said, is a crucial element, but there's so much more that we've learned that we would never have learned if we just flew a series of Hubble Space Telescopes.
Absolutely, and human spaceflight is, of course, in the first place, a political endeavor. Yeah, when the Americans went to the moon, it was a political endeavor, a statement from Kennedy that we will have a human mission to the moon and fly a man to moon and bring him safely back before the end of the 70s. The ISS was a statement or a political will from the Reagan administration at the time when they went from Space Station Freedom and then wanted to include the Russian partners into an international space station, and then Europe and Canada and Japan joined. Now again, if we go forward to the moon, and we have just signed a memorandum of understanding with our NASA colleagues to do the gateway, again, it's clearly that there is a political drive behind this. So human spaceflight always has had a political component to it. But why do we in Europe explore? This is the real question. Why are we in Europe investing in exploration? And yes, science is a big part. When we explore, we will discover new things. That is clear, and the space station is a good example. But it also brings innovation. It brings jobs. It brings things that otherwise we would not have done. Look, for example, to the Canadian robotic arm. The company that has developed this robotic arm and that has developed the techniques, the software for this robotic arm is the same company that is developing now robots that help in brain surgery. The same algorithms, the same software is used in those robots. So that's a direct spin-off, and this is only one example. So innovation, jobs is a second component. The third component is what we talked already about, is international cooperation. It's clear that today's world is a difficult world where we live in. If you look what's happening in the US, Russia, also inside Europe, the relation with China. Nevertheless, in human spaceflight, we are capable of bringing these nations together, of working day in, day out together, solving difficult problems, solving crises, and we do it every single day with people from around the world. So the international cooperation is for Europe a very important component of space exploration. Yeah. And finally, it's part of what we do today is inspiration. Of course, we all know that astronauts appeal to young people, that we can stimulate young people to choose for STEM education, science, technology, engineering, and math. And if we want to solve some of the difficult problems that we have today on our planet, climate change, shortage of water, mobility, all these things, we will need a lot of people that want to invest in science, technology, engineering, and math to solve these problems. And that is where also this inspirational element is also very important in human spaceflight. So yes, if you take one of those elements, you can always say, well, it's not worth the money. But if you take all the four together, there's not a project in the world that encompasses those four elements together and that can bring them together.
And if I could just interject just a quick update, just some difficulties connecting, and we're going to get Angelique on just as quickly as possible to bring in her perspective. But I wonder if I could ask you, I mean, you know, the one of those pillars that you mentioned, Frank, that I think is just so important is, you know, we're talking about a political statement, you know, obviously on the case of, you know, what the Apollo, you know, signified before, and also what ISS means as well. What it demonstrates to the world in terms of the ability of nations to cooperate, I think is so incredibly important, right? I mean, it's beyond, you know, the simple, I guess, the halo effect. It's the other thing as well, which is that it shows people working elegantly and productively together in spite of everything that's happening down on the surface. Is that a feeling that you also respond to?
Absolutely. It's what I feel every day. If I talk to my Russian colleagues, to my NASA colleagues, when we have difficult problems to solve, there is also always this sense of yeah, a joint goal. We are working together to achieve something together. And I think you don't find this very often anymore in today's world. And it's certainly something that you sense every single day when you work in this program. There is not one single day that people around the world do not work together to solve problems and to solve issues. And of course, yes, I'm paid by the European Space Agency. I defend the interest of Europe in this program. It's very clear. So does my Russian colleagues, and so do my NASA colleagues, of course. They invest, they defend the interest of their national space agencies or their countries. But we always find solutions where we can find win-win situations for everybody. And this is, I think, unique. We never find a solution to the detriment of one of the partners. We always find solutions where the partnership as a whole comes out stronger. And I think this is a unique example for the world.
Mm. So one of the things we've talked about, and I'm not going to put you on the spot by naming them, but we've talked about various anecdotes from your time on the station. Of course, you were the commander on your second flight as well, because it's not always plain sailing, right? There's different people, there's different cultures. And we know that space station crews, in a very broad sense, it's 3 go up, 3 come down. So there's 6 at a time on board. You're not training together until you arrive together. The 3 are, the groups of 3. And so, I don't know if you were able to share with us any anecdotes about some of the cultural, sociological clashes, because, it's quite remarkable that you can put people on a place like the ISS above the Earth, no way of kind of getting off easily. Okay, if there's an emergency, yes, there is, but not just because you don't like somebody who's down the corridor. So I just, without putting you on the spot for some of the anecdotes you've told me, I wonder if there's anything you can share about how you deal with that as the commander or as a regular crew person.
Well, as a commander or as a crew person, it does not make a lot of difference. What you need, of course, to make sure is that you understand your crewmates and that you know what they are coming from, what their sensitivities are, and then you work around that as a crewmate, and you adapt yourself, your own behavior, because at the end, what is important is the mission. What is at the end important is that you do the science, that you do all the tasks that are attributed to you. And yes, we had very funny moments on the space station. Think about, because you also need to celebrate, of course, and to laugh from time to time. You cannot ask from people, whomever they are, that 6 months they are fully concentrated and only talk about work and only do work. So we had, for example, Halloween on board of the space station, where we found all kind of nice things to dress up a little bit, and we took funny pictures. We just had an HTV arrive, which had a kind of a gold blanket that protected the hatch, the HTV hatch from the thermal protection. It was for the sunlight, and then of course we had to take off this thermal blanket, and then Nicole used it as a rope around her, so she had this big golden rope that she was wearing, and I was wearing a striped T-shirt that we found somewhere, and then the guys wrapped my hands in some plastic bands, and I was dressed up as a convict, and just the ground cold, and of course we were all laughing like hell with what we were doing. And so Bob Tursk, my Canadian hero, he went to the microphone and said, yes, Houston, can we help you? I said, yeah, we want to talk to Frank, to the commander. And his answer was, he's tied up for the moment. And so, of course, we all burst out laughing. The ground didn't have no clue what was happening on orbit. So yes, these are the nice anecdotes. Yeah, on the other hand, you also have situations, of course, where something goes wrong. One of the crewmates makes a mistake, which we all do, of course. You cannot expect, again, from people that are there for 6 months, do thousands and thousands of actions and procedures, that you never make a mistake. But of course, if you make a mistake just on an experiment that your crewmate was working on for 1 hour, and you pull the wrong plug, and his whole experiment goes down, and he has to restart from scratch. There are some nice words that are shared as well, of course, on board of the space station.
Well, and as it just so happens, we are actually having a live test of an International Space Station scenario here. Just seeing if we could solve a problem as we were going. So I'm going to send a message out to Angelique. Are you receiving? Can you hear us? Are you there? No, can't hear you yet. Well, we'll keep on working, but to fix the problem. But I guess these sort of things must happen all the time, and it's just one of the joys of live broadcasts and streams and all those things. So we'll keep on working on it. But one of the things, though, Frank, I suppose is we can talk about the broad political spectrum that the ISS can signify. But what is the bond like, between crewmates aboard the ISS? How well do you get to know people? Because I imagine, there are two key relationships. One's with the other people who are aboard, but also the relationship with the people on the ground that you're speaking with as well. Which, to me is such an interesting dynamic.
It's a very interesting dynamic, and of course it's like with the relationships on the ground, it's not very different. With some people you have a very good relationship and it will last a very long time. Before this conference I was having a WhatsApp call with Roman Romanenko, which was my crewmate on my second flight and my Soyuz commander, and we had a couple of good laughs, and I was actually telling him that I would be on your show tonight. With other people, okay, you have a good working relationship, you work together, but then when you come back, okay, you're not very much in touch anymore. I think that's not very much different to what it is here on Earth. What I can say with the two crewmates that I flew in the Soyuz for my long duration space mission, and I was with them 6 months on orbit, we have an extremely strong bond still today. Also with Bob Tursk, my Canadian hero from CSA, and with Roman. Of course, we have now gone different paths. Roman is currently in the Russian Duma elected. Bob has retired, but after his retirement from CSA, he was the president of the university in Calgary, and he's now still working for medical systems on board of the future medical systems for the Gateway, for example, for Canada. So we have gone different ways. I'm still with ESA, but the bond is extremely strong between us. And also with the ground, of course, it depends a little bit. The people that you occasionally talk to is something different. But I know very well that from with my flight director, for example, that ESA flight director and mission manager that I had, I still have a very good relationship and a very good bond at ESA. So these are things that you will never forget, because you have worked together so hard to accomplish a mission, to make a success out of something. And it's of course a shared success, because at the end, the astronaut is the one on orbit, yes, that reads the procedures and pushes the button. But that's about all we do as astronauts. The real work is done by the people on the ground.
It sounds a little bit like the way that Formula One drivers talk as well. I mean, it's always a weird thing to hear Lewis Hamilton say at the end of the race, "Congratulations to everybody else." He just happens to be the person hurling around a track at 300 kilometers an hour. You have put some of your life on the line in going up there. It's not completely without merit, I suppose.
Yes, indeed, but still, the truth is the fact that if you don't have all the people on the ground that prepare the procedures, that prepare the hardware, that prepare the science for you, that train you, that help you, the flight controllers, you're not going anywhere as an astronaut.
Yeah. So let me pick up on something which you said a little bit earlier on, and this is sort of a weird topic in a way. While Angelique's still trying to join. How would you, this idea, as you said, about inspiration, that young people meeting astronauts, and I see it all the time. I mean, it's a remarkable phenomenon, right? And I'll admit, at some points it gets a bit annoying, right? Because it's like, well, this guy just went up and did the procedures. We're doing stuff, but I get it, right? I understand why. But what was it like to be, before being an astronaut, and now, with 10 years since you've flown? How do you view that psychologically when you go into a room of people? I mean, you're just the same Frank, right? I mean, you're just the same guy. How does that affect you in a sense of, because at some point, it's like rock stars, right? There's a point at which you also have to push back a bit and say, look, I cannot be everything you want me to be. I'm just some guy that went to space once. And I've seen some of the younger astronauts sort of not struggle with it, but it's obviously a change that comes in your head.
Well, it's a change because on one hand, yes, of course, and you know me, Mark, very well. I'm just the same person. At least I hope that I'm the same person. And I ask everybody just to call me Frank wherever I am. So it's clear. but the way that the people perceive you is different, and that is what is difficult. It's what I very much said after my first space flight. Before I flew to space, okay, I was kind of a nobody. Yes, I was selected to fly to space, and people respected me and whatever. But okay, that was about it. I went about doing my business. But then I flew to space, and all of a sudden I came back, and I was a panelist, and I had to go to the Senate to give my view on space policy, and I was asked to do this and to do that. I didn't become smarter by flying 10 days to space. But all of a sudden you get this kind of this aura around you that now all of a sudden you can contribute, and you're much more respected. And then on the other hand, you come back to your agency and you come back in the astronaut corps, and then your boss tells you tomorrow you need to do this, and this is your task for next year, and here are your objectives, and by the way, this report was not filled out in time. So it's a little bit schizophrenic sometimes, because you have on one hand the policy makers, the decision makers in your country, because in Europe it's mostly in our countries. In Belgium it's the prime minister, the king, but for our French colleagues is the president, and for our German colleagues is the chancellor that they are very well acquainted with. So you get there a forum to which you can contribute. Your opinion is valued, and you're asked for your opinion, and people take it into account. You have, on the other hand, the rock star kind of image. If you go to the young people, and we still have it. If we have a session in Belgium where we do some PR, the aula is full, and then afterwards there is a queue, and everybody wants autographs. That is clear. And then you have the aura within your agency where you say, no, you're just a normal person. Here is the work that you need to deliver by tomorrow. And how do you fix that in your head, and how do you deal with that? That's not always easy, indeed. And we see some people struggling with that, but it's part of my job today, of course, as a manager of the astronaut corps, as a mentor of them as well, that has gone through all of this, to help them to realize this, and to guide them through that process.
So, because as an astronaut, you've never seen the secret memo that every other member of staff in ESA has, which is, do not give the astronauts any special treatment at all. They'll become unbearable. Angelique, are you there?
I hope so.
Oh, great, Angelique. Welcome.
Really, I mean, we have been trying with 2 laptops, an iPad, and 2 iPhones, and every time everything crashed. So I'm really, really sorry about that.
Not at all.
We're absolutely delighted to have you aboard, and they're in the value of redundant systems, right? I'm sure that just a bit of a live test there. Well, it's a delight to have you to hear, because of course we've been talking about so many things to do with the significance of the International Space Station. Just like the benefits that it has and what you learn aboard. But I mean, what does the experience of putting people aboard the space station tell us about whether, so let's put it this way. Do humans belong in space?
I think the answer to that is fairly easy. I think humans do not belong in space, just because, space is such a hostile environment. The human body is, in essence, it adapts quite well if you think about how hostile the environment and how extreme the environment is. But on the other hand, we are not made to live in space. If you ask that as a more philosophical question, I think we do belong in space, because, it's the origin of all life. I think human beings, in essence, have a very big curiosity of what's going on outside, ourselves, what's going on in the world, what's going on in the cosmos, and stuff like that. So I think it's a little bit of an ambiguous question. If you ask it from a purely scientific point of view, I would say no. If you ask it from a more philosophical point of view, I would say yes. So yeah, I think it goes both ways. But I think it's remarkable when you come to think of it that, space, and you will see that everywhere when you see movies of space, or, when you read publications about space. In essence, it's such an extreme environment. It's so hostile. You have radiation, you have microgravity, you have, all the impacts on the psychological aspects. And still humans adapt quite well. And when you can come to think about it, that we've had 20 years of, let's say, manned presence in space, I think that's really remarkable. And I think it's really something we should celebrate. And also when you come to think about that, missions are extending also in duration, and people adapt to it. And I think that's very remarkable and very interesting to see as well.
So I'm curious, as a scientist who moved over from the split now between the Science Directorate and the Human Robotic Exploration Directorate. Of course, the way we do science with our astronomy missions, our planetary missions, there's an awful lot of human psychology with respect to dealing with science teams and working how to operate. But in your case, you're actually dealing with experiments being done on human beings. And again, I'm putting Frank on the spot. He shouldn't really listen to this. The astronauts never want to be told that they can't do something or that this might be dangerous to them. I've kind of experienced this a couple of times with the astronauts. Oh, that experiment, that was nonsense. I felt fine in space. So how, as a medical scientist, how do you deal with the human factor when it comes to making sure the science results are reported well, not biased? Because that's what it's all about. In the end, there's no point saying it's all great when actually it might hurt people.
That's a good question. I think really astronauts are a little bit one of a kind in let's say, a lot of manners. But when you, as a scientist, having astronauts as your guinea pigs, let's say, or your test population, it's very peculiar, because on one hand, especially as a biomedical scientist, you want to test as many people as possible to make sure that the conclusions that you in the end make are also general, and that you can make stronger conclusions, whereas in astronaut cases this is often not possible. You only have 1 or 2 people coming in, and then this also takes quite a while before you can come to more robust conclusions. I think the nice thing about working with astronauts, or at least this is from my experience and before joining ESA, is that they are, as I mentioned, they are very interested in what you're doing, why you're doing it, what are the results, what will the results mean. And as a scientist, that's very nice to work with, because usually when you test in a clinical setting or, just in general, control people, healthy people, they often also participate, but it's a different kind. With the astronauts, it's always nice to interact. And I think one way to motivate them is just to explain why you're doing the research. And obviously it's not to discredit them or to scare them away from the risks. I think every astronaut, and Frank can maybe also comment on that, but I think every astronaut is aware of the risks that there are in space. And again, I think it's very remarkable when you come to think about it, is how well they adapt and cope to this extreme environment. And this is also something that I usually underline when we talk about the results that, for example, I had in my PhD, is that it's not because we're measuring differences or, small differences that this necessarily also means that this has a huge impact on their functioning. And some of the techniques that we use, they have such a high sensitivity that we can often, measure very small and small, subtle nuances. And as a scientist, that is very interesting. But I think, having now moved also to ESA and to the agency side, what you really want to know is what those differences actually mean for astronaut health and what it means for, your operations, what it means in order to better prepare the astronauts or to make sure that you can minimize those changes. And I think, what is important there is really the impact some of these changes have on the astronauts. And that is not always a one-on-one relationship to what you actually measure and what it means for the astronaut. And I think that is an important link that also needs to be made, and especially coming from now the agency side, that is really crucial.
Mm. How do you do, I'm curious, there must be experiments which you do which are double or blind experiments at least, the placebos and so on. Is that something where you, not exactly lie to the astronauts, but the thing you're actually trying to measure is not the thing you've told them you're measuring, that kind of thing? Is that a feature of the way the research works? Maybe you shouldn't say that because Frank's listening and he maybe shouldn't know this.
Well,
I'm not an astronaut anymore, so...
Well, it definitely is in a more clinical setting. I think one of the, and obviously in an astronaut setting, you want to do that because that's the highest form of research or biomedical research you can do, especially when you're testing, let's say, a countermeasure or some kind of therapeutic measure. It's not always so easy, and I think we come again to the uniqueness of the astronaut as a sample size, in the sense that you do not have a lot of participants in general, so this also limits your capabilities of setting up very fancy study designs sometimes. And it's not only the fact that we have few astronauts to test, it's also, you know, the constraints and the challenges we have in testing them. You know, crew time is very scarce. The resources are not always there. When you do pre and post flight testing, this is always sometimes also not so easy to get to the astronauts, or not at the exact time that you would want to get to them. So there are a lot of challenges you need to work around with, but also here I think it's that's for me why it's one of the most appealing, let's say, test populations, because it's very unique, but it's very interesting to test. And I think that yeah, I mean, science, especially in the past 20 years, a lot of science on the station, for example, has already advanced, and we have already seen remarkable publications come by. And I think this is really, sometimes we got that when we were publishing, and then we got comments from our, let's say, clinical colleagues, and they said, like, yeah, but you only had 10 astronauts. I mean, how can you make any conclusions based on that? And, you know, it's a very valid comment. But on the other hand, we were super proud that we had data from 10 astronauts, because that's quite a lot in the field. And, you know, it's always depending on what you compare it to. And I think that, yeah, especially the last few years, a lot of interesting publications that have come forward. And I think this is only going to increase even more. When, for example, also on the station, we will have longer missions, which obviously is important also to prepare for the future.
Right. So if I just one last question before we sort of broaden it back out again, because our human research program is not only based on the station, of course. We do analog experiments on the ground. We have the parabolic flights, which campaign was this last few days. Talk us through some of those parts, because that's where you can bring people in who are astronauts or not astronauts and broaden the sample out. The bed rest experiments, for example.
Yeah. Well, that's something that a lot of people don't really know about, because obviously when you talk about a space agency, logically they think about space and, you know, astronauts being up in space. So I think ESA and also a lot of the other agencies, we at ESA we have a large, I think, portfolio of also ground-based research. And with ground-based, we obviously mean here on Earth. And I think that is a very important complementary factor to, you know, actual research on the station. So indeed, we have bed rest studies where we have participants laying in bed for a long period of time, usually 60 days, which allows us to, let's say, simulate some of the conditions you have in microgravity. So you will have also a fluid shift towards the head. You will have some of the bone and the muscle changes that you see. You will also see that in the long-term bed rest. And those are really critical experiments because, first of all, they allow us to test more subjects in a relatively short time frame, which is important. The resources are less constrained, so we have more options to test. We can easily get access to the participants during the study, just after. So this is also important. And also, I mean, you can, and I think this is also important. For example, we will have an upcoming study with dry immersion, which is also one of these ground-based analogs where participants are being put, let's say, in a fluid where they are immersed and where you also can simulate their microgravity. And there, for example, we will set up 20 subjects, 20 female subjects, to also try and address a little bit the knowledge gap that we have on female data and let's say, the science that has been done up on the station. And I think this is a huge extra dimension that these ground-based studies can bring. And also, for example, to test countermeasures. This is also very important, that we can validate some of the countermeasures here on Earth first before we send them up to space. So I think this brings a unique kind of extra factor to the biomedical research we do. And it's really very important to also, let's say, further prepare also for the future missions. And we have bed rest, we have dry immersion, we can do isolation studies for a longer period of time. We also have the Concordia station at Antarctica, which is also obviously an extreme environment. You already mentioned parabolic flights, which is then more for, let's say, acute biomedical processes that are relatively short, because the flight obviously is relatively short. But I think if you pull it all together, this is a very complementary package, which adds really on top of this research we do on the station.
Yeah.
I wonder if I could ask, just to I guess, go a bit laterally, with all of this, and I wanted to just give a special tip of the hat to Jeff, who's watching online right now, and made the obvious allusion to a science fiction show we're all fans of here at Space Rocks called The Expanse, which obviously deals with belters, people who live in the outer rim of the solar system in the distant future and experience all kinds of long-term effects of microgravity, and so really interesting extrapolation, of these effects that we see on the human body. But I wondered, directing things to both of you, really, what about mental health aboard a confined environment for extended periods of time? Because I suppose the immediate question is always that beautiful view outside of the cupola, just looking down on the Earth, this jewel, and all that kind of stuff. But living aboard a space station, and I know how highly trained people, will have to be in order to be there. Does it take its toll? I mean, just like the monotony, like the loss of, so much of the familiar aspects of, being down on the surface and so on. I just wondered, just is there something that we know about the long-term effects of being in those environments that has been surprising? Because, I imagine that it's awe-inspiring, but also not easy as well.
Well, again, it's not easy. Of course, you're in a confined environment, but you know why you do it. I always make the comparison with a lot of people on the ground here that are also in confined environments. Think about people that are in submarines and submerged for long times, or that live on oil platforms for a long time in a row, or like Angelique mentioned, do exploration on Antarctica. They are also in very confined environment in difficult circumstances, but they don't see the Earth from above. They don't have all this glamour and glitter that astronauts have. They don't have a crew of 1,000 people that is helping them every single day. So I think in that respect as well, life of an astronaut is still very easy compared to what some of our countrymen or fellow citizens here on Earth are going through. So I would not say this is the biggest challenge, at least not in the space station, because again, you can call your wife every day if you want, or your kids. People that are in nuclear submarines submerged, they don't have to call their family every day. That is clear. You have two-way video conferencing once a week. You have email access. So again, life can be quite comfortable up there in the space station. What it will change is when we will have a trip to Mars, I think. Because then you can't communicate with people anymore. Then you're in real isolation, because if you would do a Zoom link like here, but you have 20 minutes delay, yes, it's a very nice conversation. You say, hello, Frank, and then you wait 20 minutes before I say good afternoon or good evening, everybody. It's not a conversation anymore. So then you're really in isolation with the people. You cannot talk to people anymore. You can just exchange remote messages. You also will not see our planet anymore. You will be constantly in the sunlight. So whenever you look out, there is nothing to see, nothing at all. So there is no return capability. You go on a trip and you know, okay, I have pushed the button and now I'm gone for 3 years, and there is no way back. In the space station, you always know if there is an emergency, if something really bad happens, the same day I'm back on the planet. So how will people deal with that on the long term in a trip to Mars? And this is something that is really the unknown. And this is also not something that you can simulate. Yes, we have done Mars 500 and we have put people in isolation, but nevertheless, in the back of your mind, you know that tomorrow I can open the door. Yeah. It's very much different. It's very much different. And I've done a lot of simulations, both for spaceflight, for aircraft flying, and I've done the real thing. It's not the same. Not the same. So, and I'm sure if we send people to Mars, it will be quite different than what we do in the simulations and in the analogs.
So, Angelique, how do we prepare people for that? I mean, one thing you and I have talked about, Frank, and I'd be interested to hear what Angelique has to say about how we overcome this, is that on the station, it is a science machine and you have a schedule. You get up in the morning, you have breakfast, you go and do science, and then you do maintenance, you do. On the way to Mars, that won't be happening because we won't be carrying experiments for science on the way to Mars because all of the payload will be for Mars. So I've joked, you're just gonna be watching Netflix, endlessly and not in real time, take a whole stack of stuff on a hard drive. How, Angelique, how are the astronauts going to avoid becoming bored? Terminally bored to the point of depression, right? Which is, I don't mean to make a joke out of it. I mean, it's a 2-year mission.
No, it's not a joke. It's a reality. Absolutely, Mark.
Yeah, I think that is a million-dollar question, Mark. How are we going to prepare? And as Frank outlined, and which I can only concur to from the scientific evidence, not from my personal experience, of course, but I think indeed you cannot simulate these kinds of things. I think what comes closest to, let's say, a long-term mission is indeed Concordia, for example, because there you have a long-term stay. It's a very extreme environment. It's not a simulation, it's high fidelity. I mean, even when you come to think about it, in winter, it's even more isolated than the actual space station because you cannot have a rescue crew going over there. You're really on your own. You need to be autonomous and you need to take care of things. So if an emergency happens, you can only rely on the people you have around you. So that's one important aspect. And I think the research that we do there is obviously very valuable in drawing important conclusions and lessons in order to better prepare. How are we going to cope with that? I mean, obviously, one important thing is indeed going to try and overcome that boredom, try and overcome that monotony of having an 8-month mission to Mars, where indeed people will not have a lot to do. And I mean, yeah, there's still a long way to go. One thing that we did a very preliminary study for at ESA last year was looking into the potential of hibernation. I know this sounds really science fiction, and at the current stage, it is also still science fiction, especially when we come to talk about it for humans. But, if you could have humans hibernating for, let's say, part of the route to Mars, then you could overcome, obviously, that psychological factor. And it also could give some additional, let's say, benefits for muscle and bone, for radio resistance. So it brings a lot of potential good things, but obviously it's not something we can implement if we're going to go to Mars in 5 years. So there's a lot of things up in the air. And I think one important thing is also that you have a group of individuals and every person is different. So what might work for astronaut A is maybe not going to work for astronaut B. So I think something that has already been done and probably that we need to build up also further on is really personalized medicine and having countermeasures that are fit for one specific individual rather than trying to find the countermeasure that works for everyone. But obviously this also requires a lot of experiments and studies.
So let me broaden out on that, because the other issue, which we talked about before you were able to come on, was the fact that on the station, it's groups of 3 that train together, but then the 3 you're on with at the beginning won't be the same as the 3 who come up halfway through your mission. Going to Mars is going to be a crew, and they're going to have trained together for a long time beforehand. They're going to know each other extremely well, but maybe something goes wrong. How would you replace somebody at the end, which has happened, of course, on Apollo. It's happened on missions, short duration missions, where you've swapped somebody in and out. You've been able to train people in parallel. But if you train a crew of, 6 on the way to Mars, and one person gets sick a day in advance, you hope it wouldn't happen, but who knows? So Frank, I mean, it's going to be, your responsibility and your success is to work out how to change the astronaut training, which has, I don't say has been routine, but has been in place for quite a while in Cologne. How are we thinking about selecting astronauts and training astronauts for this completely different kind of voyage?
I must say today we are not thinking about that very much, Mark, because this is so far away. Let's be honest, the next step that we're going to have in human exploration is most likely going to be the moon. You know that we are working in ESA on that. We are going to fly to the gateway, first in shorter periods, 2 weeks, then a month, maybe 2 months, 3 months to the gateway. Already a lot of questions that we will need to answer there. From the gateway, you will not have a direct return to Earth. It might be 2, 3, 4 days before you have a return opportunity. Radiation is going to be a big factor. How can we sustain human life healthy, and then bring our astronauts healthy back from a long stay outside the Van Allen radiation belt? And then the gateway, of course, is not a destination by itself. The gateway, the purpose is to be a command base to have sustainable exploration of the lunar surface. And this is where we're going to learn a lot of things, I think, when we are going to train crews that are going to stay for longer time on the lunar surface, that are going to explore there, that do not have immediate return capabilities. This is where we're going to learn a lot. And it's only through that process that we are going to be ready to fly to Mars. So for the moment, at the European Astronaut Centre, again, we are an operational center, we are not a research center. We are mostly concentrating on how do we take those next steps that we need to take in the next 10 years. From the research side, that's more in Angelique's area. This is why we do the analogs. This is why we do Antarctica, for example, which is very important. This is why we did Mars 500. So there is still a lot of research that needs to be done. And then the results of that research then eventually can trickle into what we will do in the European Astronaut Centre and say, okay, now we need to really start preparing what has all this research learned us. But for us here at the EAC, what we are focusing now is, of course, this ISS. Today, that's still our core business, but we are slowly starting to prepare for the next steps. By 2030, hopefully, we will have 3 Europeans that will have flown to the gateway to the moon. It's incredible thinking about that, where we were 10 years ago. It's extremely exciting. And you know that in our program, we will prepare a proposal for our ministers to also bring contributions to the exploration of the lunar surface. And our goal is to have a European astronaut walking on the moon before 2030. And so that's where our focus really is today.
I mean, that's an incredible timescale, you know, and hugely exciting. But, you know, I suppose the question at the moment is, so what happens to the ISS in the meantime? What next? 20 years on from, you know, continuous habitation, you know, is there another 20 years in it, or what's the plan from this point forward?
Well, for sure, there is another 10 years in it. So we are discussing with the international partners. Everybody has basically agreed technically. Okay, there's still some political decisions to be taken, but technically everybody has agreed that we will extend the ISS further till 2030. Yeah? And this also makes sense because if you see, for example, now what NASA is trying to do with building the low Earth orbit economy, with Axiom, for example, that's going to build a module that's going to attach to the space station. It's planned to be launched in 24, 25. Okay, it's very clear that you don't do that. If 1 year later you're gonna crash the ISS, it would not make sense. Yeah. So I think everything is there to continue to exploit the ISS to the maximum extent for the next 10 years. Then what will be after those 10 years? It's a good guess. If it's technically in good shape, I think we will continue to use it. Will we use it in the same fashion that we do it today? Maybe, maybe not. Maybe we hand it over to a commercial operator that will start operating it in a different way. But I don't think that anybody will want to trash the International Space Station if it's still in good use in 10 years from now. I can give you another example. We are now starting to replace all the solar panels on board of the International Space Station, because of course solar panels, when they are long time in use in outer space, they slowly degrade. And we see now that the power in the space station is getting less and less. And with more and more science that we want to do, it can come to a critical point. So we have taken the decision that we will replace all the solar panels and bring the power system again to its nominal value where it was at the initial part of the design. Again, it's not something that you do if you don't intend to continue to use this facility for a very long time. Yeah. So that is this. But of course, will we keep using it in the same way that we are using it today? No, I don't think so. Also in ESA, we are working very closely with partners, with industry to see, okay, can we have a different way of utilizing the space station? Can we have industrial research? Can we have commercialization of some of our infrastructure on the space station, instead of ESA building the racks and building the facilities? can we have the industry building the facilities and we buy a service from them for the use of the facilities. So all this is a very dynamic period that we are living in. Yes, it's very dynamic to go to the moon. It's very dynamic to bring Mars samples returned from Mars. But the space station, as you can see, is not a steady state program. It's a program that is in continuous evolution every single day, every single year. And we are making improvements as we go along, and we change the concept of the space station as we go along. And it's very exciting, of course, to be part of that.
So let me just jump. It's a topic we will come back to, I think, in a moment. But of course, one thing that might happen next year, we might even see Tom Cruise on board the space station. So there's an interesting thought. But before we come back to that and science fiction and everything else, Angelique, I just wanted to talk to you a little bit before we kind of lose sight a bit of the gateway. What kind of experiments are we thinking about there? Frank mentioned the radiation, and again, for everybody, right, the ISS is below the Van Allen belts. It's shielded, not from all the radiation, but there's a substantial amount of shielding there. So you as a medical scientist, what are the experiments which we will, do on the guinea pigs at the gateway, which are vital for the next step, for going further?
Well, something that we have actually done in, let's say, international effort right now, actually the past year, is identifying, let's say, the human research that will be put on the gateway in the first phase, let's say. Okay, obviously what you need to focus on there is also feasibility. You can come up with a very nice experiment, but if it's not feasible and, it requires a lot of payload or whatever, it's not going to work. So one thing that we've done is, from the ESA side and also the other international partners that have looked at that, is looked in the existing pool of, let's say, station experiments that are already running and that have some heritage there, and to see what kind of experiments we could then put on gateway. And I mean, things that you will see in the package is obviously behavioral measures, how is the crew reacting to the environment, cognitive measurements, stress measurements, but also then those measures that we know are going to change, for example, musculoskeletal parameters. And as you mentioned, obviously the radiation is going to become an important part, and that's also why you want to use gateway, because this is not something you can, to the full extent, test on the station, because you still have quite a lot of protection there. So I think gateway is the perfect place, let's say, to do that, also to prepare for longer missions then, and also onto Mars. So there's a lot of things there, and one thing that has already been brought up at the Apollo missions is also the lunar dust, something that can cause a lot of respiratory problems, and also something that needs to be looked at. Obviously, when astronauts stay in gateway, it's not going to involve any lunar dust, but obviously as we move them back to the surface, this is definitely also a topic of interest there. So I think this is going to be very exciting, and I think the first phases are going to be a little bit constricted by the boundary conditions that you have, which are even more constrained than what you have on the station. But on the other hand, everything you test there is going to be new data, is going to be something that has never been tested before. So in that sense, it's also very exciting to look at that. And I think as Frank also outlined right now, and rightfully so, I mean, the station is steady state, and also from a scientific point of view, I think the next few years are going to still yield a lot of important results. NASA is working on a Sci-fi mission, which will have, let's say, a rotation of short duration missions, and then the normal mission increment of 4 to 6 months, and then also longer duration missions of up to 1 year. And that also from a scientific point of view is very important, because we've had a few 1-year missions. For example, also the twin study where you had Scott and Mark Kelly staying on the ground. Scott was then in space for 1 year. This is obviously very interesting, but it's really anecdotal research. So you need to have that, let's say, in a more coordinated way, where you will have multiple astronauts doing that. And then those results that you draw from that are going to be crucially important also to drive then, let's say, the lunar program, and eventually also a program to Mars. So yeah, that is really important. And one thing else that I would like to add here is that something that has also been discussed more, as a concept, not really in practical terms yet, but we just finished, let's say, a series of workshops on that, is maybe how we can use the ISS to prepare also for a Mars mission, where you can say, like, okay, we take a part of the ISS, and we, for example, isolate the crew there and use that to really simulate, which would then obviously have a huge advantage over the simulation you do here on Earth. And I'm not saying it's going to materialize, but it's one of the things that the international partners are also looking at, and which would really also be very justified, let's say, to do.
Yeah, I love the idea that the twin study with Scott and Mark, of course, you know, one of them stays in space a long time, the other one becomes a senator. I mean, you know, that's going to affect any experiment now that he's a US senator on top of it. It's going to wipe out any kind of similarities. But becoming a politician clearly changes you more than being an astronaut, I think. But
no question. Well, we have people watching from all over the world, and you know, we're delighted that they were able to connect with us. And a few of them have brought some questions as well. And you know, I had one, you know, that I suppose you know, could go to anyone in the group. So please just jump in. Richie has asked, as a primary school teacher, I've used the activities of the ISS crews and their lives aboard as a big stimulus for STEM, or I suppose STEAM education. Are you conscious of the kind of effect that it has on kids, and that they find it as inspiring as they do?
I certainly do, because as I said, I still do a lot of conferences with kids, even now in confined ways, via Skype or via whatever means that I can connect with them. I still go a lot in Belgium, talk to them. So absolutely, I see a lot of kids that get inspired, and I now see even kids. I'm now also teaching in the university in Leuven, and I now had recently one of the students that said, "Oh yeah, and I got into this because I saw your first space mission, and I got really so enthusiastic, and now he's one of my students at the university." So yes, by all means, I think, and that's why I said this is one of the reasons why Europe invests in exploration, is the whole inspirational activity, not necessarily for kids to then go into the space sector. That is not the most important thing. The most important thing is that we need a lot of bright young people that invest into STEM and STEAM directions in order to solve all of the complex problems that we have brought on ourselves in this planet.
And Angelique, you're an author as well, so you've you know, used that avenue for reaching out to people. You know, you're in the chain there. How have you seen that when you've gone out as a book author and talked to people? How from the science versus, you know, not the human side so much to speak. You know, I'm an astronaut, I've been there, but in your public communication activities.
Well, it's something, I mean, the outreach and the science communication is something that I started quite early on in my PhD, and that I've always really thoroughly enjoyed. And I have to say that in particular, kids and younger people, and I mean, I find that the nicest audience, because I think especially children, they still have this, like, I don't know, this unbiased curiosity of things, you know, they want to know why things are the way they are. And, you know, especially when you just bring up space or astronauts, you see this kind of twinkles in their eyes, and, you know, you got them, and you can explain. And for me, that I really like that a lot. I think for me also, as a let's say young female researcher, I really find it important also to have some visibility, in the sense that I think it's important that young scientists, young female scientists also sometimes take the word, because, you know, there's still a lot of bias when we, you know, think of technology and science and you know, engineering, and there's still a lot of bias towards, yeah, being that male dominated. I think in the last few years, this has already changed dramatically and drastically, but I think there's still a lot of work to be done. And, you know, what is the easiest to do is just go out there and, you know, speak with kids. And for example, I also organize workshops together with a friend of mine, where we, you know, have a small one-day space camp, and it's really nice to interact then with the children. And I think these small things are really important. And then sometimes we get messages afterwards saying, like, yeah, my daughter really enjoyed it, and now she also wants to become a scientist. And, you know, in the end, it doesn't really matter if they become a scientist or not, but it's just to give them at least the knowledge that they can be it if they want to be it. It's not because, you know, they only see male professors or male scientists. I think it's important that children realize that there is, let's say, a place for them as well if they want it. And okay, if they want to do something completely else, fine. It's not my mission to convert everybody into a scientist, really not. But it's just that I think it's important to have some visibility and to do the outreach. And I think this is, I've always found that very important at the university, that we couple back to, let's say, the general public, because we are using public money as well to do what we do. And, you know, it's the same at ESA, we are using public money. So I think it's important that we at least couple back what we're doing, why we're doing it, what is the outcome, what implication does it have for the general audience. And I think that is, it's very interesting, and I really like it a lot, those actions, yeah.
So one of the things in Space Rocks, of course, we've brought in lots of different people from lots of different fields in STEAM, with the A being, you know, as equally important as the others, including, you know, actors and musicians and poets and writers. And Frank, you have, of course, had some experience there yourself with both with Star Trek, and probably more than I know, Star Trek and U2 are the two things I know about. So tell us a little bit about that for the sake of the audience who may not have known about these things, because they're a few years ago now.
Yeah, well, first of all, I'm a big Star Trek fan. I'm a sci-fi fan, but especially Star Trek, and especially the next generation. And if some people go and look online and Google ISS Expedition 21 poster, they will see that we have a nice poster of our expedition with in the background Starship Enterprise, and in the foreground ISS. And then the idea is, of course, that the ISS is the first real permanently habited infrastructure that we have built internationally, in space at least. So from the entire planet, and then of course in the long future goes to Star Trek. And as astronauts as well, you have the capability once, twice or three times for your flight, that you can link with somebody on the ground, and they call this a crew discretionary event. And you can select anybody on the ground, and then the ground support team is trying to reach out to those people if they want to have a private conference with you, a private chat with you while you're on the ISS. And this is, of course, for the psychological support. And during my flight, of course, I wanted to talk to Patrick Stewart, the commander of the Enterprise. I always wanted to sit in this big chair and say, "Warp 9, engage." I never mentioned, I never managed to sit in a big chair, but at least I managed to become the commander of the ISS, which is not the closest I can get, I think, or we can get at this moment. But he accepted to do a conference with us on board of the ISS. And it was amazing. He was extremely well prepared. He knew all the crew members that were on board. He knew the background of all our crew members. And it was planned for 10 minutes. And at the end, we took, because it's on a laptop that you can float around. And everybody said hello. And we took Captain Picard, Patrick Stewart, around the space station for more than an hour. And it was really enchanting. And so we maintained contact afterwards, and afterwards he was doing a play in New York, and I visited in New York as well, and so we had some nice encounters as well in New York. So yeah, very fond memories of that. And on the other hand, yes, art is of course very important. A lot of the young people you can reach via art, and when I was flying as well, U2 started with their world tour. And they also had the idea to link with the ISS and to show to the world the ISS as a symbol of cooperation, as a symbol of love, as a symbol of working together, which was also, we were not the only ones, and they also had messages from Desmond Tutu, for example, in their show, and from other people, and so they wanted to link also with us and with the crew, and in particular with me as well, because they are from Europe and I was the European commander of the space station. So yes, I was in I think several, if not hundreds of YouTube shows all over the planet, and it was very nice for me as well as a psychological event, because on one of the occasions when they were performing in Dublin, they invited my kids as well to go, my wife and my kids, to go to Dublin and to watch the event while there was the live link with the space station. So that was, of course, for me a very big support as well.
That's great stuff. Alex, I'm sure you have some more questions perhaps from the audience there.
Yeah, some really interesting ones. We actually have one. One of them comes from Nantes, asking about like the future, space policy framework, and just what we can expect from that area, which I think is, probably diverts us back toward, where we think things are going. But I think it's a really important one.
So I don't understand the question very well. Is it space policy globally, or is it what we are trying to do in Europe?
Let's pick a topic. I mean, if it's not the topic, the Artemis Accords, for example, maybe.
Well, the Artemis Accords is, of course, it's not so much a policy, or maybe it is for the US, but it's a framework in which that states or countries from all over the world can cooperate to a joint exploration idea of jointly exploring the moon and the universe. So we have seen that a lot of European states, of course, are interested to join the Artemis Accords, which is great because it provides, yes, a kind of a framework in which we can all work together and which we can all contribute to future exploration of space. And I'm a big believer that the future of exploration of space will be a global endeavor. That's also why at ESA we are at least trying to work together with our Chinese colleagues, where we are thinking, can we fly, for example, in the future also European astronauts to the Chinese space station, just to bring all these nations together. We have already European astronauts learning Chinese, for example, not only Russian but also Chinese. So I think this is very good, because you need to have a framework. Why is the ISS still there after 20 years? Why can we still operate? Why can we change it? Why are we so flexible? Because we have this IGA, this International Government Agreement, that is very broad, but that allows the states within a certain framework to work together and to cooperate together. And so you need to create that framework. If you don't have that framework, then it becomes very difficult. And so we are now trying to establish that through the Artemis Accord. It's a US initiative, but in Europe, okay, we are still under the IGA umbrella. We are having the MOU for the Gateway. We're having a memorandum of understanding for Mars sample return. So we have to see where this goes in the future, but that we need to establish a framework, for me, is very clear, yes.
Yeah. At the working level, Angelique, when it comes to the scientific experiments that are conducted, because of course we like to think of one ISS, but there's a Russian side, there's an international side, and of course the people work together and mix together. But this is a genuine question, I don't know this. Is all the data on board from all of the astronauts and cosmonauts, is it shared equally? Is there a different kind of access protocol? Or is it that, once you're on, you're on? You're on mute.
Yeah, sorry. Obviously, there's a lot of, let's say, international collaboration, although there is still, a big difference between, if your experiment targets Russian cosmonauts or whether your experiment targets US astronauts, so American and European crew and Japanese crew and so on. So there's quite a lot of difference there, not only, in a practical way, but also in a logistical way, depending on what kind of astronaut you target, they're going to return to a different city. You're going to have to set up your experiment somewhere else. So there's a lot of logistics that come into play there. Obviously, and I have to say that I was positively surprised about this when I joined ESA, because I was not aware of this. There is a lot of international collaboration, and it's really like, for example, also for the life sciences, there are a lot of working groups where ESA sits together with NASA and with the Russians and, with JAXA, all the international partners, and where, initiatives are being discussed to collaborate, but also to, be as efficient as possible, to make sure that we are not all putting our resources on exactly the same thing and that we're duplicating a lot of things. So I think this is very nice. And for example, there's a meeting coming up in a few weeks, and it's very interesting to then also hear what the other partners are doing. And again, this also helps to set up international collaborations. And again, I was actually positively surprised, still being fairly new to ESA and to know how these kinds of things work. It was very reassuring for me to see that there's really a lot of international cooperation. I think the ISS is obviously the best example also of this, and also for, Gateway. A lot of it will be done jointly together with the other partners, and I think this is very nice because everyone has to bring something. Everybody has different backgrounds, different expertise, and and then I speak from, let's say, ESA has specific expertise in this or that, and NASA has other expertise, and to try and map it all together and bring it all together, it's very nice, and it's nice to see that, let's say, so globally, and that for me, this has always been a big motivation to go in science, and now also in particular in space, that people are, and maybe I'm saying this too naively, but that people are, working together for something, for a greater goal. And this might sound very naive, but for me, this is really an important aspect. And again, I was positively surprised to see that this is really also being done.
Mm.
I don't think that's naive at all. If I could just interject, I think it's hopeful, and to sort of bring things together. I suppose that's somewhat the appeal of things like Star Trek and so on, because they kind of they imagine a future in which we can cooperate, and one where we have step beyond our petty differences, perhaps, and just began to see ourselves as one species. And so I think that there are definitely synergies there. So I wouldn't say that that's naive at all. Speaking as a fellow Star Trek fan, I have to say this. Indeed. So we have some really good comments coming in as well. We're on the brink of a commercial space age as well. I suppose that's been happening for a long time, but it's increasingly on the lips and on the headlines, and so on. So we have an interesting comment. What are your thoughts about things like Starship that are in development and so on? I mean, is this just marketing, or is it as a big deal as they seem to be making out? That comes from Brian.
Well, I think if we can make it work, and if Elon can make it work, it will be a very big deal. I think you have to understand that today the cost of the ISS, 70% of the cost of the ISS is transportation. So basically building rockets, either bringing astronauts or bringing experiments or food or water or you call it. So if, of course, we can have a completely reusable spaceship like Starship that can bring tons of goods to low Earth orbit, and that can change the cost of delivery per kilogram to low Earth orbit, it will change completely the paradigm. The question is, can we make it work? Well, let us at least try. And I'm quite sure that probably 15 years ago, or maybe even as short as 10 years ago, people were not convinced that reusable first stages were a good idea. And now we will see that Thomas Pesquet, the European astronaut that will fly in April next year, will fly on a reusable booster of Falcon 9. So I think there is a lot of development ongoing. There is a lot of initiative from the private sector, innovation from the private sector, that I think the space agencies were not able to bring anymore at a certain moment. And so I see this as a very positive development, and let's see where it brings us.
Yeah, I don't know if I'm more cynical, but I don't mean with regards to that, but I just to note it as it was passing. I don't know if you spotted that last week the official beta for Starlink, not Starship now, but Starlink, the internet constellation in space, which of course astronomers have been discussing at length. Is this a pollution of what we're trying to do in astronomy? But it was interesting in the beta when you sign up to it. If you want to sign up to it now, you actually have to agree that there would be no international jurisdiction of law on Mars, that SpaceX can operate there freely. And I mean, of course, it's not a joke, but it's setting a scene, right? And so those questions are coming back to the space policy question. They also have to be answered in the commercial domain. How do we view the resources, which at the moment, this is where the Artemis Accords start talking, right? It's about who can own what and what can you call your resource, what can you take away? And this is true for asteroids as well. So I think there is an enormous amount that we still have to do in order to prepare for a commercial private partnership. And we're experimenting on the ISS, as you pointed out, Frank. I mean, we are putting commercial payloads there. And if indeed Tom Cruise flies there next year, what does that mean, right? In terms of, rights to knowing, if you're on board and you're an astronaut, can you leak what the film is about? Will there be an NDA which says that you can't say anything? How does that work, right? I mean, so there are so many questions, I think, which are still pertinent. Alex, if you've got anything else, I mean, I realize we've gone on for an hour and 20 minutes.
Well, obviously, I mean, the biggest thing is we all know, anyone who watches Tom Cruise film knows that he runs in every single film. And of course, where is he going to do that aboard the space station?
He runs like this, right? It's just the same style every time.
We have a very good treadmill.
He'll have to find a reason. Maybe because there's your plot line, right? Because the solar cells are degrading. He'll have to run on the treadmill to power the station, to keep all the other astronauts alive. Something like that.
Well, I suppose in some way it's a perfect bookend for this conversation to think how far the space station and indeed all of these developments have taken us. Just over the last 20 years, who would have thought that we'd be talking about something so matter-of-factly, as something like Starship happening, as something like the laws and jurisdictions of Mars, and indeed a Hollywood actor, just going into outer space. I mean, these are truly remarkable times. I suppose that's what Space Rocks is all about, is really just pointing it out, because we really are in interesting times, to put it mildly. And so I want to thank everybody who's joined us online to watch. We've had some great questions and input from people online. And of course, Angelique and Frank, what an absolute pleasure to have you along to explore all of these ideas. And we hope we can have you back again sometime.
Okay. Thank you very much, everybody, and thanks for all the viewers online for watching tonight.
And before you go, because we've done the Star Trek thing, I don't know if you've seen any of our previous videos, but we have a very cheesy way of signing off, and that is, and it's always a test to see you can do the Vulcan hand salute, which is space.
I can't, unfortunately.
And rocks, so space and rocks together. So it's very cheesy, but there we are.
I can, but the other one I can't. I'm sorry.
So for the only guy that's actually been to space can't do the space part. All right. Well, thank you very much, both of you, and I'll see you at work as well. So soon enough on another Zoom call as we continue in our odyssey through coronavirus.
Okay, thank you very much, everybody. Bye.
Thanks very much.
Well, and there we are, Mark. As ever, I think we end these broadcasts with as many questions as we started with, if not more. But I guess that's the thing that's so fascinating about all this is it's 20 years on and it's hardly a conclusion. There is an incredible future ahead for the ISS and I guess all these areas of exploration.
Yeah, I mean, 20 years is a time scale in which you can get bored of things and you can say, well, we've been there, we've done that. And I think Frank pointed out very eloquently at the beginning, this is a thing which is not even quite complete yet. There's still some modules to be flown. There are new ideas about how to exploit it, new models. And as he also said, the science has been a key thing, but we've got to get to the point where you've got enough astronauts on board, enough time to make those experiments work well. So there is a very bright future, I think, for the ISS and what comes from it, going back to the moon and going onwards to Mars.
Indeed, all important stepping stones. And, it's funny how frequently Star Trek came up. It's almost like, it was fated because, of course, if you're still online and you're watching, you might want to tune in next week around this time on Thursday, because Mark, we have a very special guest joining for
we do indeed.
Uplink,
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, exactly. That celebration, the 30th anniversary or the 30th uplink. We talked about Patrick Stewart being the commander of the Enterprise. We've talked about Frank being the commander of the International Space Station. So who better than to welcome back next week than a great Space Rocks supporter who's already been involved in many events that we've done, than another Star Trek captain, Mr. Jason Isaacs. From Star Trek Discovery. So that'll be a great thrill to have Jason back next week. And given the political situation around the world today, I think we might have to put an 18 sticker on that one. And we'll see. We'll try to get Jason to calm down a little bit from his Twitter feed, but and get him to adopt the international policy of diplomacy.
To be honest, I think we're going to have to buckle up for that one, because it's going to be quite a ride. And if you've been to our actual events before, you'll know Jason is a wonderfully entertaining man, very outspoken, but I think above all, and what's really important is he really cares about what we're doing here, and so it's going to be a great time indeed. So spread the word. Come back next week, and go to spacerocksofficial.com. Sign up for our newsletter. Mission updates are going to be coming out very soon. Until then, thanks so much everyone for watching.
See you soon.
Okay. See you, Mark.